Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Pop Culture SquadCast. We're trying to hope Mike gets better. Mike and his mic are giving us a struggle at the moment. But how are you, Mike?
I'm doing okay, except I've turned my lessons in 20 minutes to 20 minutes idle maniac.
Yeah, I'm hating it. I had a lot to talk about with you. But you're really buzzy again, and I hate your microphone, and I think I know what your Hanukkah/Christmas presents are going to be for me.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. I've had decades of computer experience, and this one not only drives me crazy, but it makes me want to kill people. No,
Well,
I often feel that way.
I know. Um, I'm gonna have to pull you out though because it's a super buzz that I think it's gonna be hard for people to hear right now.
All right, all right. Well, it lasted.
Well,
See,
if you figure out something, if something gets better in the next whatever, just buzz me up and we'll get you back in.
that's luck.
I,
All right.
I'm very sorry. All right, folks, I am very upset about that, but we're gonna keep going. We want to keep you guys entertained. We have a great guest tonight. I want to let you know that we're going to be talking to Amit, um, and we're gonna get you going. It is Giving Tuesday, and it's an important day. I want people to think about it. There's uh, couple of organizations that we want to highlight, and I apologize for getting straight back here, but here we are. One of them is a shirt I'm wearing. It's called "To Write Love on Her Arms," and it's an organization that I support. Um, I think it's a very important organization, and they help people struggling with mental issues and substance issues, and I give to them regularly. I think they do a great job of supporting people, helping them find uh, um, uh, peace and recovery. So it's something that I definitely think people should give it a shot about something. If you're looking for some place to donate today or in the next few days or whenever you feel like you want to, I'm going to put the link to the organization in the comments so anybody who wants to go can check that out. Um, the other organization that we want to highlight is Hero Initiative. Hero Initiative is an organization that we have been big supporters of for quite a while. We have friends who have been recipients of the work that Hero Initiative does. They take care of creators who have given their efforts and life and talents to this comic industry that is extremely um, tenuous in terms of their support for creators. They're people who are freelancers who don't have the common trappings of a regular job that would support for them in older age in terms of healthcare as well. So it's something that we absolutely support, and we want to encourage people to go. And you can get to heroinitiative.org. The link is in the comments. You can check that out. I had a couple other things I wanted to talk to Mike about, and so I'm kind of disappointed that he's not here. But I think I'm going to hold off on them, and we're going to bring in our guests and kind of do that as soon as possible. I'm going to start out with introducing Amit. He is a comic book writer. He's also a creative director for other types of media and has a lot of irons in the fire. Um, his first comic book, Eden Frost, just came out last week. I read it at New York Comic Con when I saw him, and I want to before I bring him in. There's a couple of videos I'm going to play here. One is first we're going to play the trailer to this comic so you can get an idea what it's about. So just hang on, we're going to bring that in here. Oh, hang on 1 second. My fault. We need to make sure that we're getting the sound. Hey, Mad Cave does good work. That's a heck of a trailer. It's a good book. It's good timing. Um, so before I get any further away, I want to bring in our guest, Amit Tishler. Hi, Amit. How are you?
Hello, hello. How are you doing, Bob?
Thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. How was your Thanksgiving?
Honestly, it was great. For the
Good.
most
Good.
part, it was pretty
Good.
relaxing. It was mostly video games, watching shows, doing a teeny bit of work on the side, but nothing too serious, which is exactly what you want your holiday to look like.
Yeah, exactly. I want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
Great book. I'm glad it's out there. I'm glad it's finally out there. People can see it. I read it the day I got it, which was October 15th. Um, and it's great. I
Thank you.
encourage people to read the back matter because it's pretty interesting. Mike's not here, and I am very sorry about that. But when we had talked about you being on the show, Mike texted me and said that he had read the back matter and was very interested. And I'm sure he had a bunch of stuff we wanted to talk about that. But it's a great interview. What inspired you to tell this story? Once you give the listeners and viewers an idea about what the story is about.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole rabbit hole if you really want to get into it, but
Sure.
If you do, then
we can absolutely.
We can.
We're here.
Okay.
We got time.
All right.
Let's go.
So, look, it all kind of started with. I'll give a little bit of background about myself because I think it'll help contextualize it.
Well, you know what? You're great, and I want to do this, but I'm gonna save your breath, and I want to show the listeners. This was my introduction to Amit, and I'm gonna bring this on. Here we go. And
you have to take into account is no matter where you go, no matter how much you feel yourself, because our family are atheists, like we're all secular. But she was like, it doesn't matter what you think of yourself, you will be thought of as a Jewish person, right? That's how you're going to be presented. And 20-year-old Amit, arrogant as hell. So I just went like, nah, people are gonna see me the way I wanted to see me, and that's all it is. Like, it doesn't have to be a dominant part of my identity. I think what happened in 2020, this happened right after my last living grandmother died, right, my mother's mom. And the immediate thought that came to my head when that happened, when I saw it on TV, was like, wow, I'm really glad she didn't live long enough to see this. And I kind of had to, hold on for a minute and really think about the thought that I just had and why I had that reaction. And it also forced me to think about what my mom told me, where I realized it doesn't really matter how I view myself, right? It doesn't. Because in the end, it is a scapegoat. It is a label. It's an identity that becomes part of you, whether you'd like it or not. And it can be weaponized against you. And that's a lot of what I wanted to really put in the narrative of Eden.
So I was I thought you did a great job there on
Thank
that
you.
panel. Ironically, you're sitting between two of our other guests who've been on the show, in Steve Orlando and Alex Segura. So we've got all three of you. So that I was happy about that. But what you said there about growing up in Israel and not identifying yourself through a religious lens, and then coming here and having that put upon you. And how did that realization work its way into this story?
Yeah, it's honestly it's a good question because it is such a big part of the entire theme and statement of Eden Frost. And I'll actually start with an anecdote that I don't think I've ever told anybody because it's relevant to the video that you just showed. So I was sitting next to Steve Orlando, right, who I've never met before this panel. And afterwards, we had a very short conversation, but one of the things that he told me really stuck, where he said that he found it, I don't remember what word he used, but it threw him off, the fact that I was talking about how I never really had to think about myself as part of like a Jewish identity, and that I had that attitude of like, this doesn't matter. People are going to see me as whatever I want them to see me. Right. Because he grew up here, right? He grew up in the States as a Jewish person, and that did affect his identity. And he definitely had, let's say, experiences in his own childhood that made him acutely alert and aware. You're always aware. Which, once again, if you grow up in a very different kind of environment where the majority of people you'll meet are Jewish, you don't really think about that. Right. And I think that recognition, that realization to me came from a somewhat similar place, but very late in life. Even though I grew up, again, Holocaust survivor grandparents, right?
Sure.
On both sides, I grew up with all of the stories. I grew up with the notions. I knew why they ended up where they ended up, why the kind of family trauma that got carried over, through generations, even during my upbringing, and how it affected both my parents and us. I was aware of all of that intellectually. I was also acutely aware because, I'm a history buff. I do have a lot of interest in world politics. So it's not like I wasn't aware of the problem of anti-Semitism even in modern times. Whether it's in the States or in Europe or really anywhere else. But still, understanding it intellectually and all of a sudden, I guess, getting slapped in the face during 2020 by literally seeing, it's what I'm quoting there. Like, I turn on the TV and I see the march, "Jews would not replace us." And I'm like, oh.
So are you referencing like 2017, 20 with the Charlottesville, right? Is that what you're
I'm sorry.
referencing?
Yeah, and then all throughout 2020, essentially a big spike.
all the way through the entire
exactly. To me, that's just a chunk that came.
It's just it's all bad stuff. No problem.
Yes, exactly. So that's where it started emerging, and from there it just got amplified. The rise of the far right here that has a very confusing view of everything, but that anti-Semitism just sits at the core of it in a way that I found very baffling, because it seems a little, I don't know if to use that term, tacked on. Just like, how did Jews get into all of this conspiracy? But the fact is, it forced me to really think about, wait, this very old school kind of classic form of, I don't want to call it racist, because it's not exactly that. Anti-Semitism is its own brand, and that's my intellectual brain kind of goes into the fascination with that.
Bigotry is a good word.
Yeah, it's bigotry, but it's a symbol. And it's a
Sure.
very malleable one, which is why it has managed to survive and endure through multiple, let's say, significant changes in human civilization. There's a reason why something works, right? Or why it keeps making a comeback. So for me, sitting and seeing this all of a sudden really like anchored me in reality and went like, this is still relevant. You always kind of think about it as something, oh, this happened in the 30s and 40s. Yes, little instances, but who is going to take this seriously nowadays? Like, it's ridiculous, right? The whole premise is ridiculous. People have more access to information than ever before. Again, kind of naive way of thinking if you think about it, but
Yeah.
that really caught me off guard. And really, that to me, 2020 was the significant marker because of, and I don't remember what it was. There was something like my grandma died in 2020. Those images kept on repeating on TV and other things and statements. I think like at the time that there was either the debates or something. These motifs kept on coming back. And I saw literally Nazi flags on US soil being like waved. And I was like, wow, I'm glad that she died before she was even aware that this was happening. And once again, that really just anchored me in reality and made me go like, okay, I feel like I have to say something and I don't want to be, and this is the, creative part of me. I didn't want to do it in a way that is preachy. I didn't want it to do it in a way that's necessarily the most expected way. I wanted to give my own, let's say, twist on it or my own personal statement, because I don't think my views are, or the way I frame things are necessarily the mainstream approach to either storytelling or even my own way of seeing the world, because I do come from a very secular background, not a religious one.
Right. Sure.
So it really frames how I view everything, once again, from this like almost like an outsider point of view of somebody who's like viewed himself as the outsider that this is not totally relevant to, but it's kind of tied to our history, and realizing that doesn't matter. And now I have to think about it differently. And I want to be able to, like, my mission statement, and that sips into every little bit of Eden Frost as a story, is that I want to force people to just take a beat and actually reframe their thinking. And the best way to do that isn't through telling them they're wrong or even showing them they're wrong. For me, it was through taking them through the mental state or the journey of characters who are actually starting from a somewhat similar point of view, where they are not aware, right? In many ways, Alex and Yuli in this story don't understand why the things happening to them are happening to them, because
their world was fine.
Their world was fine. Their neighbors were their neighbors. They are, as far as they're concerned, Ukrainians from the area of Galicia. Like, this is fine. And all of a sudden they're getting accused and they're getting bombarded with all of this information that they were not even aware is there, but it is obviously significant.
Right. It's awesome. My family goes back to Galicia as well. So does my wife's.
Awesome.
We are half. My mother's side of the family is all Eastern European Jews. My father's is Western Catholics. So
nice.
So
my father's family is from Buchach, which is now Ukraine, right?
Right. Well, it's great. It's an interesting concept, because when I was growing up, my great grandfather's I was told he was Austrian, because when he left, it was Austria-Hungary.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's in Poland, and it's really Galicia, right? So it's very interesting when you go back and you look at the censuses and stuff like that. But so the story opens up, and let's get back to the book for a little bit. Yeah. We're going to get to other things as well, but the story opens up where these two brother and sister are running for their lives. There's been a massive catastrophe in their hometown, which is a very small, rural area in, early 20th century Ukraine. And what is their path? What's going to happen to them? What can people expect? And I want to, before you get to that, 'cause it's a good question, but I do want to say you nailed it. And one of the biggest things, one of the hardest things about writing, especially comics in this form, is making the reader want to read the second issue, and I can't wait. So
Thank you.
you succeeded there. I mean, anything about writing is wanting to make the reader turn the next page, and you're able to do that. And it's great. The pacing is good. The feel of what's going on, the anticipation, the events that are being laid out and given to the reader. Great job all around. But what do we expect for these characters?
Yeah, and once again, thank you. And also thank you for having me on the show, because I haven't said this yet, but I really, really appreciate it. I actually recognized you when you reached out to me. Thanks to that mustache. Good job. Also, because I saw you from the audience, you don't really like focus too much.
Sure.
I'm like, that's an identifiable face. I remember.
I will keep it for a while.
It's like my hair. That's how people recognize me for a while away. But anyway, back to the story. As far as Alex and Yuli go, and I'm gonna try not to give too much away in terms of where I want this to go. Also beyond this arc, but one of the things that I'm hoping will come out of these first 4 issues, which kind of tell the first story arc, they're very different people, right? And this is a mini spoiler that's not really a spoiler, but you'll notice this as soon as issue 2 comes out. Issue 1 is told, you will see some captions in it, like, and I keep a lot of things very vague, like Yuli's essentially talking. We're peering into her head. Exactly. And how she processes the events around her. And some of it feels like it's very much anchored in the now. She's responding to something Alex is doing at the moment. And some of it is more general, right? Almost like philosophizing, thinking you're not sure if she's talking from the past. That is intentional. But what's going to happen in the next issue, and then it's going to flip, every issue switches perspective.
Oh,
so
nice.
in the second issue, we're going to actually start hearing Alex, right? And his thoughts and how he reacts to Yuli, how he views her, what he values, his role as a protector, as an older brother, as somebody who was entrusted with her safety. So there's going to be a lot of perspective, to me, is a big part of the issue of identity. So these things are going to go hand in hand with this entire story structure. Now, the reason that's very important to their journey is because the thing you'll realize, I think it comes out even in the first issue, they are very different kinds of people, just inherently, right? Yuli is very emotional, very impulsive, but at the same time, she's very aggressive, right? She is more suspicious. She's a lot more, let's say, less merciful and romantic about everything. Because she's angry. She's a very, very angry person, and she processes this entire thing as a betrayal, as something that we should fight against. We should make our stand. Alex's approach is a lot more of like, if she's the offensive, he's on the defensive. He's somebody who, she's very much of an individualist, which comes out, I think, from the first issue as well. And he is more tribal. And that's going to be a significant thing for his journey as well. He's a lot more emotionally attuned with other people. He's a lot more empathetic. He's somebody who wants to mediate. He always seeks to diffuse every situation, to make everybody happy, to not just react immediately, but take a step back. The downside of that is that he's a little bit more gullible. He's more willing to believe. He wants to believe in the goodness of people in general. And more importantly, he wants to belong. Those facts about the two of them are going to play a really significant part in their growth as characters. Because one of the things that I want to do as the arcs move forward, I am going to have little time skips, because the Russian Civil War itself is a bulk of time, but it's multiple years, right? It's 1917, and then more or less fizzles out at like 1922. This journey is going to change because they're also teenagers. They're impressionable. They're going to respond to different things even in this first arc. It is going to start giving you an idea of where their personality or perspective on what's happening in the world around them and their role in it needs to go. And it's going to start, no matter how much they love each other, it will start drawing them apart. And that's a big part of their journey of like, we love each other. We're literally tied to each other by this magic system, but our philosophies, the way we view the world and how we should live in it, are starting to diverge. So it's very, very vague on purpose because I don't want to spoil too much. That part is going to be a really, really significant part of their journey and the story as a whole.
That's awesome. You said a couple of times, so I'm asking you to repeat yourself a little bit. But you said that you specifically chose the time frame that you're using to move it away from World War II. You didn't want to be there, but you wanted to say something about. And I think we can say, I think we should say there's something about Jewish mythology that plays into this story, right? Why that part of the world and why that time frame?
Yeah, so I'll start with why that part of the world, or more of like, I think those two are tied, like the why that part of the world and why the time frame.
Sure.
And there's multiple reasons for each. Just first and foremost, I think World War II is a narrative that we are, as a society and as Western culture, very, very aware of, right?
Mhm.
We kind of know the story. There's always little stories to tell, and we'll always find, because it was such a massive event that spanned over the course of multiple years and changed everything across the map and across the board. But as a framework, especially when it comes down to like the Jewish story in this, we're just very aware of all the details. Like, and that awareness is very specific to me, because when you think about World War I, the first things that come to people's mind are just the visual identifiers, right? Because it looked different. There were different kind of weapons. There were different, like there was the trenches. There's all of just the visual associations. And then you have, when you try to really dig into why did this happen, that's when people go, oh my God, it was a whole mess, because it was. It's not as clean. Whereas World War II is kind of an oddly clean story in retrospect, right? Now we have a very clear view of, these are the baddies, these are the goodies, this is why they clashed, and this is the history. There's a very easy to construct narrative that we got very, very used to, and we understand it. Russian Civil War is coming right at the end of World War I, and it is like no other conflict in the 20th century and no other conflict, I think, in history. It is it's so weird in how unbelievably complicated it is and how little people know about it. Now, one of the reasons that I even was drawn to this is because I knew I wanted to stay away from the very clean story, because to me, trying to draw an equivalent, and people do that very instinctively. It's the whole joke about like every bad person is Hitler, right?
Right.
That's the easiest thing. That also becomes a cliche and people become numb to it. And I also don't actually think that World War II has that much in common with what's happening in the world today. And that might blow some people's mind, but I don't think that's accurate. And I think if you look at post-World War I, there are a lot more lines that we can draw to very specific events, mentalities. Because I don't just look at like, here are the historical events that happened. Here are the symbols that, it's more of the psychology of how certain ideas came into popular culture or the popular consciousness, and how certain events kind of trickled down and how divisions were, like established in different societies. When you look at that, I think everything that happened after World War I and before World War II, that's where we should be looking in order to try to learn something. We always try to learn from history, right? So that's the time period. Within that time period, that capsule of the Russian Civil War is just an amazing time capsule that has so much of it.
Yeah, there's a lot. The Russian Civil War revolution has it is a capsule of what expanded in the west of Eastern and Western Europe over the next 20 years. Like it happened in a flashpoint.
Yeah. And one of the things, as I was starting to research this, because I realized, okay, there's a lot more here to draw from, I was doing research, just looking up a lot of, because I knew that one of the themes that I wanted to discuss was anti-Semitism as a tool to talk about identity, because Eden Frost, to me, isn't a Jewish story. It just so happens to be a Jewish story because that's a perspective that I know how to tell. But it is a story about identity as a whole, and the idea that identity is an intellectual construct, which is something that we all know, but we also don't, because that's not how we behave.
Right.
We take identity as something that is almost scientific in our heads, and we always react to that. It's
a biological characteristic, right?
Exactly. That's just how we behave, right? And
Right.
fighting against it is hard, and that's one of my goals, is just to force you to constantly go, hold on a minute. No, it's kind of all bullshit. Or it's all in our heads, but it does have a lot of significance. So to me, when looking at that little time capsule of the Russian Civil War, you have it all there. But the reason I looked at that specific point in time came from a weird kind of anecdote. So I was doing research on essentially like what led to what eventually became the Holocaust, which is once again the AAA game version of
right.
essentially like Jewish pogroms. But if you're going back, pogroms have been a thing for a very long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anti-Semitic riots have been a thing for a very long time. As I was doing research on different things, I actually ran into a series of lectures and snippets that came from a woman called Alyssa Bompard, she works at the East Coast, and she does her entire, I talked to her once as I was developing this as well, her entire profession and research is all about literally this time period. And she was talking about what she called, I believe it was like the forgotten pogroms or the hidden pogroms or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where literally in Ukraine during that time, 200,000 Jews, a brutal massacre, right? There was essentially almost like a pilot, because the Nazis studied the Russian Civil War closely. A lot of the things that eventually got polished and reused but really amplified in the Nazi propaganda machine, and even how they thought about, pushing their message forward, they took a lot from what happened with the white movement during the Russian Civil War, and not just the right movement, right? So a lot of the visual symbolism, a lot of the language, a lot of the ideas, and even some of the mechanics, right? How do you transition from something like a pogrom, which is almost impulsive? Some of them were planned, but it's a little too raw, and it's not clean. It's not the Nazi way, right?
Right.
Sure. But you could see the evolution the closer you look into it. And you could see how studying this very well would eventually lead to a much more controlled and cleaner way of doing this entire kind of operation. And it's eerie. And the fact is, she was pointing out this massacre, no matter how huge it was, kind of got buried because it got oddly overshadowed by the Holocaust. People just kind of forgot or were never aware that it happened because, yeah, this is big, but okay, this whole time period is a mess, so we don't fully understand it. This is the Holocaust. This is easy to understand, right?
Yeah. Well, mass media had matured significantly by then.
Yeah, exactly. So looking at that fascinated me, because the minute I looked at that, I went, and here are all of these equivalents. This is where I can see a lot of these same nuggets of things that I can really draw a line between the now and then. Not with World War II, where everything is so polished and kind of like clean and structured and planned. It's a lot more impulsive. It's a lot more scattershot, and there is a lot of division. And that's a big thing. It's not, party A versus party B. The Russians, even though that's how we think about it, by the way.
No, yeah,
like a lot of people are like, Russian Civil War, it's communist versus the white movement, whatever they are. That is completely untrue, right? You had the White Army, which were a completely fragmented thing on its own. The Red Army was also fragmented into a lot of different groups with a lot of different ideas. It took a while for everything to get consolidated under the USSR. Then you had a Black Army. You had a Green Army. You had, an army, a Ukrainian army that wanted independence, a Western Ukraine army. Like, a lot of different people essentially came out and went like, this is the opportunity for us to make our stand and to push our ideology forward, and it all happened at the same time.
So that's the difference between what happened in Germany versus what happened in Russia.
Exactly.
Because the German military was unified and under one rule, under one marching order. Whereas, what was happening in the massive Russia was these massive tribal, local factions trying to, assert some level of control over the self-control over themselves after being under namesakely under the thumb of an emperor for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And that's really the big difference, right? It's rise of an empire, which means consolidation of power, versus collapse of an empire.
But it's interesting
Those
because
make a difference.
I think people have a poor sense of the actual control of the Russian Empire.
Yeah.
I think people think of it in terms of either Star Wars' empire or more like the British Empire,
Yeah.
where they were very systematic about making sure that viceroys were here and this was there and they were getting all
Yeah.
the stuff back. Whereas the Russians just said, as far as I can see, that's my border. Whatever happens in there,
Yeah.
it wasn't. They were the Tsars were bankrupt more than they weren't, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And their power was fragmented. I mean, this is
Right.
true to even Russia today because it is such a massive
Mhm.
country or massive, let's say, geographical location. There is no real way, even in modern times, to fully control all of it. And certainly at the time, because of all of the new ideologies that were emerging during that time and after World War I, what you ended up getting is a war of identities and ideologies. There's a detail that I put in the first issue that kind of just you really pass by it fast, but it's going to make a comeback multiple times, and it's based on a factoid that I read that I went like, this is kind of amazing and also ridiculous. Where there is a point in the story in issue 1 where Alex and Yuli run past another group of soldiers, right? Now, anybody that knows the symbolism would be able to identify, wait a minute, that's not volunteer army, like that's not the white movement, they are Red Army, right? They're actually they are the enemy, right, of the white army. But to them, they don't
They're
notice
all
that. They
army.
just go, soldiers, oh my God, they're already in the
Run.
woods, we have to run. Yuli actually mentions it in a very quick line. She says to Alex something like, but this is weird, like something about their uniforms seemed different, or they seemed a little different. So that detail is going to...
I caught that. I remember getting that. I'm like, I wonder where that's going to come from. It's going to come back to me.
So this is something that I read that, again, blew my mind. So you're looking at World War I kind of bankrupted all of Europe, and the Russian Empire collapsed, right? But essentially, the collapse wasn't immediate. It's not like, it's gone.
Yeah.
Essentially, World War I and the Russian Civil War overlapped at the very end. They were happening at the same time. And that's kind of the time where Eden Frost is starting. It's like end of World War I, and then Russian Civil War goes into, high gear.
Right.
There were instances, because they were essentially reusing, like all of these new symbols and badges and flags, they were done in a rush, right? Really in a rush. Like the time that Eden Frost is happening, which I specifically don't mention because I want kind of like people to piece it together over time. But the exact moment of time is literally right when the volunteer army as part of the white movement was formed, when that idea kind of coalesced. So, and for anybody who doesn't know, like essentially the volunteer army was huge. From the white movement, they were probably the biggest, I'm going to put this in air quotes, organized, because they weren't organized, but the most organized, let's say, uniform unit, right? With a specific agenda or a specific identity. And they were essentially, they came out of the Russian Empire going like, okay, the Tsar is gone, but not our, basically the whole idea, they were anti-communist. That's where their entire philosophy came from. They were still pro-imperialist. They didn't want to give up all the wealth that they had. Like there was a lot that went into it. Everybody on both sides, where would they get their weapons? Where would they get uniforms? They reused the same ones from World War I. Right. So you had instances where soldiers from opposing sides literally just meet in the middle of nowhere, start talking because they both think they're from the same side. And during conversation, 10 minutes in, they realize I'm facing the enemy and a shootout happens. That's insane.
Right. I mean, the concept of people, and I saw someone talking about this recently, like the concept of people talking, understanding the world that they're existing in wasn't always like this. The military industrial complex that happened after World War One and specifically after World War Two, you know, the Russians weren't armed. They didn't have, you know, brand new boots for everybody and brand new
Yeah,
guns and all the right weapons. It's just whatever you
yeah,
could find. If it was a stick, it was a stick.
that's
You know,
right.
and because where is this money coming from? It's not coming from poor people who are trying to, maintain a lifestyle.
Right. Right.
So
And so that instance to me, I wanted to start showing it once again from the perspective of these kids who actually can't tell the difference. You'll see it as it goes. Like Alex has at least idea of like, okay, I understand what communists are. He knows just enough about it, and there's reasons for that as well. And he understands, okay, these people are anti-Semitic. I have to be careful in a very specific way. But for both of them, they still don't have enough savvy to really understand the differences, because even the people who are fighting on both sides sometimes couldn't tell, which tells you a lot about, once again, the idea of identity as a construct. If two groups can come together, literally like, hey, how are you guys doing? Like you see each other as people and you're just talking. And all of a sudden, when you realize, wait a minute, opposing sides, humanity is gone and we can shoot each other. What does that say about the whole idea of being a construct versus like you actually, the idea of identity can sometimes erase humanity. And I think that is such a it's dangerous when it's weaponized, which is certainly what's happened in both World War I and World War II and everything in between.
So I think we did a good job of getting to why we wanted this time frame. But it has, since you've started to write this book and since it has come out, the world has changed again.
Yeah.
And you've said, you had said in that same speech where you were talking, that you didn't need this book to be so topical.
Yeah.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine happened since you started writing this book, and then 6 weeks ago we had war. Can you talk about that? How you feel about what's going on?
It's a very surreal kind of feeling, and everything happened in really bizarre times. Like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if I exclude Crimea as like a buildup, but the Russian invasion happened after I've already finished developing this, or I was already talking to Mad Cave. Like this was in process of getting signed, and all of a sudden this happens. Now, the story just so happens to happen in this area, but it's not really about. I mean, it is and it isn't, but it has nothing to do with the current conflict, except for, by extension, because it's happening when it's happening, it's kind of a prequel to what's happening right now. So people wanting to understand more about the origins will end up actually picking some of it from what's happening because I do use a lot of the events of the Russian Civil War as an anchor, and the rise of the USSR or the fall of the Russian Empire to what's happening right now, there is a direct correlation. It is kind of a sequel, right? So that just ended up making it relevant through the setting and not necessarily through the story. But, they all blend together. Now, right before I went to New York Comic Con, where you saw me and that video happened, this was just a few days after October 7th.
It was a week.
Yeah, it was a week, right? To me, all times blended together because I was in Iceland at the time, was about to climb a glacier, and all of a sudden my phone just explodes. And then I was disconnected from the internet for essentially an entire day, which was probably healthier than doom scrolling the whole day. But that was surreal because I think in the end, what happened in October 7th, and I'm going to put all of the political discourse aside, like just that event and everything that followed on an international map was weird because it was a pogrom for all intents and purposes. It has all the markers. And to me, it was weird because I read so much about, and it gets really graphic when you read about the pogroms in Ukraine during that time period. And the stories that came out were so similar the mass rapes, it was
Sure.
it was unbelievable, right? And once again, this idea of like, oh my God, more relevant than I thought. But then, putting all of that aside, it gets muddled in the whole political discussion around it. But what made Eden Frost, I think, even more almost like feel urgent and relevant at this point, that I really didn't, like I said, I didn't need that extra push, is what happened on the world stage as far as the insane spike in anti-Semitism. Like, why would somebody, and this is just to really simplify that, why would anybody just go to a Jewish American, people who have never lived in Israel, have nothing to do with it at all, and go after them in some other country with violence, with murder, with whatever? Why? And it's that idea. It's that idea of identity as a generalization. It's weaponizing it, because it is no longer about the political implications. It's no longer about, it's something different. And people need to be able to separate those two things, because anti-Semitic events happening worldwide that are completely like the individual versus the nation, like there are so many themes that are all in this book that I really didn't want to have to do something this instinctive, because I thought it was reflecting on the past and help us understand, and just seeing this happen in real time. So that was kind of horrifying, but also made me go, I guess the timing is just right to say something like this. And it's ridiculous that I think we even need to have this talk. But this is a problem that, once again, to me, goes beyond Jewish people. Right now, the perspective I can give is related to Jewish people. But any identity can be weaponized in the exact same way. And
sure, and it is.
Yeah, it is.
It is often. It's hard for, I think, Americans, American Jews particularly, to understand. Like, we, growing up, you are identified. You are taught the identity. You are taught the centuries of oppression, the centuries of attacks and pogroms and whatever you want to call it, and other things where the anti-Semitism rises, and you're thought of as the other when you're this tiny small percentage of this population. So that it becomes it becomes an interesting dynamic, and I've been struggling with this. I've been struggling with this for a very long time. I've tried to stay out of it. I've tried to keep my voice out of it, because I don't think anybody is speaking truthfully. I don't think either side is being conscious of the other side. I think everything everybody says is selfish, with selfish intent. So I don't. But like I said, but your concept, and to get back to that about identity, is there's more than anti-Semitism as an objectifying identity in American policy and society. There are there's anti-Hispanic things. There's racist against African Americans and blacks and colored, skin color, Asians as well. It doesn't matter where it is. Americans in our society, it doesn't matter as long as you are outside of that white Anglo, identity, you have a story of someone in your identifying group being attacked. And it is the most horrific part of our culture.
Yeah, and I think there is to me the closest equivalent that I can think of, in the way that I look at all these things in a very like analytical kind of weird way, but I always try to find patterns and logic behind everything. Like, instead of looking at something and just going like,
it's
horrifying, and it's hard, right? But I've kind of spent my whole life being fascinated by these things, kind of tracking them historically and trying to understand them, because I think the minute you understand some of these things, you can also help have a more helpful discussion with other people, which, like you
agree.
said, a lot of the discussions kind of get muddled with emotion, misinformation, laziness about lack of research on both sides, and like I said, a lot of selfishness, because everything is a little more complicated, and you kind of have to get through it if you really want to be helpful in any way, and not make it like it's X versus Y, and it's because that's how you boil it down to identity politics, which are the absolute worst kind of politics. But I think the Jewish identity is fascinating, and the closest equivalent that I can see is actually like LGBTQ community.
Exactly.
Because the way I view this, I always see it as like, why is that's part of the journey of why I had to think about this. Why is anti-Semitism so effective? Why? To me, it comes down to the fact that, when you think about the blatant racism against Black people in America, or really anywhere in the world in history, right? It's very easy to identify somebody for a different race.
Mm-hmm.
You see it, right? Which means there is a clarity to it. It's less paranoid and more targeted. So once again, cleaner to understand the fucked uppiness of it all. But for lack of a poetic way of
We're coining
saying,
words here. We're coining words.
Right.
Don't worry about it.
But for me, like, the weird thing about Jews, and especially if you think about Jews in Europe, for example, if I ask you, what is a Jewish person? What do they look like? Now, immediately when I say this, anybody listening to this conversation will have a lot of different variations in their head. But there are different stereotypes, and they're all wrong, and they're all right. Because being Jewish isn't a race, right? If you just look at Israel as a society, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, it's extremely diverse, because you have like roughly like half of the population is of different European. Like, European is a big term, but that's maybe half. And I'm just treating the Jewish community, not like the Arab community. But essentially, Mizrahi is Arab Jews, Sephardic Jews, people who come from Tunisia, from Egypt, from Iraq, from Iran. Like, these aren't white people. And they're about half the population. A whole population of Yemeni Jews, right? Like, and population of Ethiopian Jews. These are Black people who are also Jewish. So it's because it is essentially an ethno-religious identity, right? It's a fuzzy thing. And that's why it's effective. It's because if you think about, let's say, Nazi Germany, right? One of the very effective and very smart, calculated moves that the Nazi Party has done is to go after Jews in a very like analytical way. So they tied it to bloodlines, right? To eugenics. They said like, if you're this many generations, if you have Jews in your bloodline, you are tainted, we will come after you. But here's the problem. German Jews looked exactly like the non-German Jews. The Ukrainian Jews, like Alex and Yuli, look like, I look Middle Eastern to you? No, this is Slavic, right?
Just
100%.
just like your point being LGBTQ community, because
exactly
you don't. It could be your neighbor.
Bingo.
That's the fear. Exactly. They instill that. It could be the guy next to you, and you should be afraid of him. We need to fix that. And the other concept that these organizations and governments or whatever it is that do these things, they make it so that your impression of the size of that population is orders of magnitude larger than it actually is.
Yeah. And there's another component that comes out of that, right? The idea
I've seen people who, like, they'll ask, how many people do you think in America are trans? And they're like 40%. And it's like less than 2.
Yeah.
Less than 2 out of 320 million.
Like, yeah. And it messes with perception, and it does another thing, right? So, and this to me was fascinating us about specifically the Nazi method that certainly worked with what happened in the Russian Civil War as well. So if you know that somebody is coming after the Jews, and that it's so fuzzy who's a Jew and who isn't, right? In the end, the Nazi party is like, we'll decide who's Jewish or not, right? That's what it comes down to. But you have a checklist of things that determine who's a Jew or not. Well, as a neighbor of a Jew, I might not be anti-Semitic, but God, I don't want, the Gestapo to come to my door and knock on it and accuse me because, not worth the risk. Maybe I should point at my neighbor that I know is Jewish, then I'll be on the right side.
Right.
That's why it works.
That's how they co-opt.
Because it turns people on each other. It triggers a paranoia because they look exactly like you, because they are exactly like you. Then all of a sudden, you're afraid to be accused of being that. So you'll point at the other, you'll turn on each other. And now you have weaponized your own population. There's less work for you to do, right? They enforce it for you. And it's a defensive thing.
It's an interesting concept. And I'm thinking, as we're talking about this concept and putting it back further, I think about stories like Fiddler on the Roof, which, was, probably, took a little bit from the World War II's society in terms of its implementation. But the concept there in that story was, and and I say this, so my children's great grandparents, their mother's grandparents were Jews who fled. They lived in Turkey and they fled the Ottoman Empire in World War I and made it to Cuba. And so, right, they were like 13 and 14. She was pregnant on the boat from Istanbul to Cuba. But they grew up there. Like her grandparents grew up there, and they had a family of pretty much secular Jews. But that concept, right? So according to the Nazis, my children have no choice because they're there's so much Jewish in them. Even though like my own perspective is I've practiced Judaism, I've practiced Catholicism, I've studied tons of other religions. Essentially, I'm an atheist, so that's how it goes, right? But I'm culturally, familially, I have Jewish things. It's interesting because even when they were in another part of the world that we don't normally think about as being oppressive to Jews, and they felt they had to leave because of the collapsing Ottoman Empire and what was going on there in 1918, 16, 17, something like that. And they ended up in this other part of the world, not able to speak the language, knowing nothing, and had to figure it out on their own. They eventually had to leave there, flee from there, and ended up in America. So
no, but that's really what it comes down to, right?
Right.
It comes down to the fact that it is very, very effective, and it always comes back because it preys on that paranoia of there is no difference. This really isn't the other. It's the same kind of person. So how do you tell the difference? And it's both the fear of they are among us, but it's also, I don't want to be identified as one. Those two things together are just so effective. So when it comes down, and once again, if you look at the Russian Civil War and take identity beyond the ethnic identity, right? Now we're looking at also national identity. It was a war of ideologies. If everybody looks the same, everybody is essentially neighbors of each other. You're getting this entire concept on steroids, and it does cause chaos. There were so many
it's a lot more chaotic because that conflict was a conflict of ideas. Versus the American Civil War, which is easier for Americans to understand because it was a conflict of economics and it was locally based. So a whole neighborhood was all together against that other neighborhood that was far away. It was easy to say that my neighbor is not my problem.
Yeah.
Whereas in other places where there's civil wars, it's just what you believe. Not where you're from.
Who you are, because notice again, conscious choice. I deliberately made the Lowe's, the family in Edenfrost, be secular and not like they're not Fiddler on the Roof. They're not living in a shtetl, right? when you look at them, you don't think, oh, these are Jewish kids. That's very intentional.
Right. Sure.
Because I wanted to trigger that, like, wait, why is this happening? Confusion from every direction. Now, here's, once again, when we draw equivalents, right? When we try to draw a line. When we started talking, one of the things I said is, like, I look at all the conspiracies and everything that's happening right now, today, and I always go, and it's funny, I was in an amazing Alex Edelman, like the comedian, I was in a show, it was Saturday or Sunday, and it's one of the things he brought up again. I'm like, there we go. He was talking about that idea of, like, it being relevant again. So if you look at right now, all of these conspiracies, we're talking about government, Republicans versus Democrats, socialists, blah, blah, and all of a sudden, the cause of all of these problems, corruption, somehow you put Jews in there. It's the fault of the Jews somehow. It's whatever secret Jewish elite and crazy Jew lasers. All of a sudden, it feels out of nowhere. It's like the Deus Ex Machina. Like, in the end, you're just like, aha, it was the Jews all along. What is this twist? So that idea, when you go all the way back to the Russian Civil War and all of the acts of anti-Semitism happening around it, it was an instrument. It was a scapegoat. And that's what I was talking about in New York Comic Con. This was used by both sides. And that is, again, a pretty mind-blowing point to think about. Most of the anti-Semitism came from, the Tsarists, from, like, the white movement, but it wasn't just them. It was literally inherent to every one of these armies, and all of them use very loose factoids to try and tie them to the Jewish community in order to use the other as a target.
Right. It's easy to say, it's easy for the communists to point to Judaism because they want to, they want to talk bad about religion, but it's easier to talk bad about the Jewish religion because it's a much smaller group of people than talking badly about Christianity, who are much more of the people who are next to you, who you want to convince. So you just talk about them, and then you kind of, we're going to do it all together. You get them, you convince them about one thing, and then you just pull the rest through.
And it's muddled, right? Because the Red Movement did have Jewish people involved in it, like from the beginning. And it was fragmented, and they had a hard time controlling it. They were, in terms of anti-Semitism as a whole, they were the better ones in terms of they tried to get a grip on it. But the fact that they struggled, there were pogroms done by factions of the Red Army, tells you everything you need to know. Because a lot of the resentment was also like, oh, they are essentially lesser. They're like, B-grade citizens, and now I need to be on the same level with them. I know I'm a communist, but come on. Like, there's a lot of these old ideas that keep coming back. All sides can kind of use them. It's malleable. And by the way, that fact of both sides kind of using Jews as pawns, also going to be an element in Edenfrost.
Great.
And I want to do all of this in a way that I never want to, and this is going back to the series itself, and you probably noticed, I don't give people just like data dumps, because I want them to learn about this conflict. I don't want you to come in going like, oh man, I better, brush up on my 20th century history and learn about the Civil War.
And you also do it in a way where you're not, open up my brain skull, and here, let me drop you a whole bunch of information in,
Exactly.
It's very much of a story about a family, a brother and a sister, and they are struggling and they are learning, and you learn as they learn what's going on.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
It's great. Want to. This has been a great conversation, and we'll come back to it. But I do want to get to a couple of other things. We have a couple of interesting questions that are in the chat, and I want to. One of the things about your book is and the question is, can your story be told? Can be used in schools, and that's a great concept that's going on. I think that this is definitely usable by the education. It's not outside of something that people high school, surely, probably even younger, would be able to do that. Is that something you look forward to, or you hope to get?
To me, I guess I'm not objective because I wrote the story, so it is for other people to suss out. I do think that as a story, I would love for people to be able to use it for education, because part of my goal is to educate with it through story and not through like big data dumps, and through visuals as well. It is violent, right? And it addresses violence, and it does have like sometimes crass language. It doesn't get too bad in any respect, but it is something to be aware of. Like I wouldn't put it in an elementary school, right? But certainly for, high school, maybe even middle school, yes, because in the end, it was a lot of the vibe was very inspired by, shonen anime, right? It is more adult in some ways, or could be registered as more, but a lot of it comes from there. So it has a certain level of bluntness and violence that younger readers probably not, but teenagers definitely. And I'm hoping that resonates, because that's when you really hope people start asking these questions or wondering about these things. So hopefully, and thank you to whoever asked this question.
Yeah. I want to talk about your collaborators here. I mean, like what was that process for you? I mean, Bruno Frenda's work is just, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. And Taylor's a friend, and he's a fantastic letterer. I mean, he did a great job on this, especially because there's so many voices coming at you, and the way that he laid this out is just wonderful. What was that experience like, getting pages back, and how that worked?
Oh man, that's part of the best part of the process. And again, I want to also throw editors don't get a lot of credit. James B. Emmett from Mad Cave.
Yeah.
They're the freaking best. So the whole team that Mad Cave put together for this has been honestly incredible. Now, I'll tie it to a little bit of my background. I come from a production background. I used to be a 2D animator. That's kind of how I started my career. 2D animator for television, for games, yada, yada, yada. From there, won't get into all of that. Right. So I'm very used to like a production cycle in general, to art direction in general.
Is this different? How different was that? Yeah, go ahead.
There are definitely differences, and there's, again, how much do you want me to get into that? Because I worked on technology, games, and
right. I mean,
television.
We like to talk process here a lot. We want to talk about how the muffins get made.
Yeah. It's got more in common. Let's put it this way: it's got a lot more in common with, and I think that's obvious with anything linear like TV than it does with game development, because software development is a whole other thing I won't get into here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it does have a lot of the same, let's say, not the same pre-production steps, but similar pre-production steps. And the output or the end product is where differences you really start seeing them, because from script to storyboard, a lot of equivalents. They're formatted a little differently, but even the way I write, right? So I use the comic book format. I studied it, I went into it, and I started writing more of it because I've been a comic book consumer. I'm kind of a consumer of all media, honestly. I'm a big gamer, comic book fan, animation fan, the whole package. And I've kind of done all of these things as well. So for me, a lot of this was very, very familiar. Mad Cave put together the team for this, and I'm really, really thankful, because they really thought long and hard about who would be a good match for anything, from whether it's like variant covers to the artist itself, Bruno, that they matched us. And oh my God, they always sent me like options of people. He was always on the list. When they picked him, I was happy for a few reasons. Aside from, like, obviously you've seen his craft. He is incredible in terms of output, and also incredible to work with. My process is very pedantic just because of the way I work. So aside from script, I rely a lot on visual. Sometimes I even like just sketch, like, this is what I'm thinking, but do whatever you want with it. My goal is always not to restrict, but to, now you're in my head, the way I see a composition or a pose or an idea. Now do something better with it, because I was a 2D animator. He's a much better artist than me by long shot, right? Just next level. So when they brought him in, one of the first things that I noticed about his portfolio is that we like a lot of the same things. He's just a fan of a lot of the same franchises.
That's cool. That's great.
Yeah, right? It's significant. So when you use certain references, he's going to get it on a different level. It's not just going to be, oh, okay, I visually understand what you want. He gets the emotional impact. And I think you see a lot of it also in how he uses expressions. Because when I came in, I did, again, part of my process is I put a very detailed, I never come in with like a loose idea. I have extensive pitch packages. I work with artists on putting together essentially pre-production. Here are the basic designs. Like, it's very detailed. I write art guides, so when the artist comes in, they kind of know everything they need to know. And then there's a process of like them coming in and putting part of themselves into it and redesigning it and reshaping it. And it's amazing because you could just feel like, this guy's in my head. I put something on there, and what he brings back, like, this is exactly what I was going for. And it makes the process very smooth. It's very gratifying, because you feel like the person you're working with just understands where you're at and feels the same things.
Right.
So it's been humbling, and I feel very fortunate. And with Taylor, he's just a freaking pro, right?
He's
He just
great.
wrote something. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah,
So he's
Taylor's
very quick
great.
and very efficient. And James has managed this team. He's taken a lot of stress out of, off of my plate, simply
Right.
because he makes sure that all the deadlines are met and that we do have the best team and resources that we need. So yeah, it's been really cool to see, because it's also a faster process than both game development and animation. Animation is unbelievably slow.
Sure.
Like I wrote the scripts for Eden Frost almost 2 years ago. Right? I finished writing them. So the production cycle from like the moment you more or less finish and start art all the way to the end, I would say almost 2 years, right? Until we finish the series. In animation, that's a very rushed, like, how the hell did you do it kind of development cycle.
It's hard. It's hard, especially when people get excited. People who are watching animation series today, and they're like, "Oh, I really like Invincible. I can't wait to season 2." Well, it's going to take a while, guys. Hang on. It took. I know someone who worked on in the animation of Invincible, and I remember when they started working, and I remember the years later that we finally got season 1. And it was a long time after that they said that, I just finished what I was doing on season 2, and that was quite a while ago before we actually got the season. So it takes huge differences. But yeah, I want to kind of touch back. I mean, one of the things we like to talk about, your jams and stuff like that. And you said, I saw you say that comic books were the medium that charted your creative career. And that's an interesting way you said that. But what comics did you consume that fed that fire? Like, what were the comics that you were a reader of? Also I really want to ask this question because I want to know what the comic reading scene is like in Israel and Tel Aviv where you grew up versus what we experience.
Yeah. So both are excellent questions. I'll start with the first one. The first one is actually a boring one to answer because it's the most cliche one. I was a big superhero fan. Like, when I started, and I still am, but Spider-Man was my hero.
Which Spider-Man were you reading? That's my question.
So this was the 90s. So like I got into comics more heavily when, and again, retrospect, not the best period for Spider-Man, but that's the one I walked in on. It was the Clone Saga.
Sure.
The Clone Saga was happening.
That's okay. Listen, Howard Mackey is a friend of mine. I love him dearly.
There you go. There are redeeming qualities about everything. But
I understand. He takes the heat. He takes the heat. It's good.
Good. So like Spider-Man and then Uncanny X-Men, like when in my early teens, like they did Age of Apocalypse, which I absolutely loved that entire project. Superhero comics, primarily Marvel. Like I was a big Marvel guy. DC I got into later on. And a little bit of like Image because Spawn came out at the time and this was the 90s. Right. But it's kind of where you start.
I understand. I love I don't know if you know this, but I love comic books. I love anybody who loves comic books. I love people who make comic books. I love everything about it. I think it's one of the most magical mediums. And I find myself, when I talk to people of your age, and like they grew up loving this thing that I was like, I'm working on being an adult right now, and I don't have time for all these, big boob, small waisted shit that's going on. And it's that we're like Steve Orlando is one of my best friends. I love him so much, and he loves Spider-Man 2099, and I cannot understand, but I love that he loves it. You know,
You lost your edgelord, man.
no,
You're
he
in the
he never
edgelord.
tries to be the greatest edgelord. He has other ideas about that. But yeah,
Look, so that's on the very mainstream stuff, the stuff that's
Sure.
less common, that's very funny in retrospect. So I was also very into Asterix early
okay,
on.
that's
I
great.
loved it. Which, by the way,
Sure.
now Mad Cave has the rights to,
I said,
right?
yeah,
Paper
that's
cuts.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
so I was just like,
awesome.
oh, they have all of Asterix. That's so, and again, taps into it's honestly, I mean, I was always into history as a concept, but that definitely got me into it because I realized that there were things about it I was way too into for somebody my age reading it.
Yeah.
So, and there were Hebrew translations of Asterix specifically.
Interesting.
So, moving into your next question, because that's, I feel like, the more interesting
Oh
one.
yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm now 41, right? So I grew up in the 80s, and then 90s were my teens. When I was growing up and my interest in comics kind of really kicked in, and by the way, it starts like most, let's say, artists, because I was a production artist for a very long time. I was the kid in the class that was drawing all the time. So I was drawing comics. I started from a lot of local stuff, right? Like local artists like Uri Fink, like, just Israeli artists, because that's all we had. Mainstream American comics, Spider-Man, X-Men, were incredibly hard to find. Because there was no official distribution or import.
Sure.
The only places that you could find them were kind of in, the magazine section of some bookstores. Like if you would go sometimes, if you like flip through all the, like they had Wizard sometimes, and it's not all stores. Like, so sometimes I would go, like me and my friend were like 16 years old, hop on a bus, go to the middle of Tel Aviv, like jump in, because there were just a few stores there that carried just a few monthly issues of something. So you would get
did that become like a mecca that you would just go to all the time?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. It's and by the way, that area is now so you can actually get Eden Frost in Israel as well, because my friend actually manages one of the biggest
that's great
stores in that area.
Sure,
especially.
That's coming here.
Yeah, exactly. So like and it's because we worked in an animation studio when I first started working over there. It's a very small country. But essentially, yeah, it would be kind of like the mecca for all freaks and geeks, honestly. Like you would go to the center of the city and there's a few stores there. There was an arcade. So like all of your nerd culture, there was very little of it because it wasn't mainstream at the time. And you would have to go on a journey to seek it out, which wouldn't be a fast journey. We didn't, you only start driving at 18 in Israel, and we were not even close. We were like 14, 15. So you would go out of your way to find it in very specific stores because you knew that they had some of them. Whenever my parents would travel out of the country, they would go to the States. That's one of the things I always ask them, like, bring me that comics, bring anything back. So you would have to seek it out. It also makes it very special, right? Because if you had to do so much work just to get your hands on one miserable like Spider-Man issue at the time, like, by God, you're gonna read it 1,000 times. Like, it matters. Because these things were also not translated, right? They were in English.
Sure.
I was studying English in school, but my first language is Hebrew. A big part of me learning English in the way that I talk today, because I lived the majority of my life in Israel, right? I moved here when I was 28. So a lot of my English came from pop culture, from watching animated movies when I was 12. I remember like watching, I don't remember what it was. It was the last, but there was a certain point where I basically told my mom, I no longer want to watch dubbed Disney movies. From now on, only with subtitles. And it was a conscious choice that I stuck to. That has taught me a lot of my English slang. Just like I learned the language from comic books, video games, and just like
movies
film
and stuff.
Yeah. So it really played a big part and was a huge influence. And of course, when you start as an artist, you don't think of like filmmaking as a medium that's even plausible for you. So when I started, I'm like, I'm going to be a comic book artist one day, right? So that's where you start. If you want to tell your own stories and you're an artist and you're passionate about, and this is one of your outlets, that's what you want to do. Then animation came along, and I'm a huge film buff, and I was like, that's an option. I'm somebody who just chases a lot of his passions.
Sure.
Like,
do it all.
animation, video games in my career. I have literally done them all professionally, and now I'm kind of doing all of them at the same time. So,
And that's
but
fantastic.
that's kind of how that evolved.
That's great. What has been your family's like reaction to you making a comic book? Like after you saying, go get me this thing, go get me this thing, and now here you are. Like, what has that been like?
Very excited and very supportive. Like,
Well, that's great.
It's been really, really sweet.
And I'm sorry, I'm pulling that from one of our questions. This is Sherry who had asked that question. So
thank you, Sherry. They've been very, very supportive. They've been very, very excited. Really nothing dramatic to say. Like I named Yuli. Like there's a lot of my family. I don't know how much they're aware of that, but there is a lot of inspiration, not just in terms of locations, themes, whatever. I've based characters on certain personalities that I'm
sure, as you would,
yeah. And also named things, right? So aside from like obviously that area, right? So I picked Galicia for a very good reason because my father's family came from there. My mother's family came from Slovakia, so that wouldn't even be relevant in the context of this. And Yuli, who's one of the main protagonists, she's named after my mom's original name. Her name was Yulia, right? So now it's Esther, but it's essentially like her original name was Yuli, and my grandma called her Ula, like Yulia, right? Like her entire life. So definitely named her after her, but the personality of Yuli was actually the very first thing, like that and the golem. When I started developing this concept, those two things were the anchor. Alex actually came later. In my very first version, I was like, how do I tie? Like you're starting to do development.
Sure. I love that concept. Like I have this idea and I want to get this. And then I want to, I end up, and then you have to like pull it away. Like it's great how the concept of banging your head against the ideas of what you want to get done and realizing that, I need to come at it from this direction.
Yeah. And a big part of it comes to what you want to say to me, right? I always start every story I ever write, and in all series that I'm going to be publishing in the next, because I have more titles coming out next year with both Humanoids and Mad Cave. But in every title that I ever develop, it's always anchored in a statement. Alex came to be because of that statement, because of the identity as a construct, because I needed a, not foil, but I needed another angle that Yuli couldn't provide in order to create that division of philosophies. But when I started, it was Yuli. So her personality is very much based on my grandma, my mother's mom. That's why when you read her, she feels like a very specific human being, very fleshed out, because that's the kind of person that she was. Very stubborn, very like self-driven, very wrathful as well.
Is this the grandma who died just before?
Yeah.
So very cool.
It's directly correlated. And a lot of the things that she said and a lot of the things about her story really stuck with me. And also the way that she handled a lot of situations. There is both the cautionary tale parts of it and also the absolutely just like worth admiring parts of it. She was a fascinating person. And so she represents essentially, Yuli is very much based on her. She was 14 when she was dragged into Auschwitz, right, with her 90-year-old sister. And she lost her entire family in the Holocaust. Her story is absolutely horrifying. Alex, as a character, is very much based on, his personality is a lot like my mother, right? And in many ways, I feel like my personality is trapped somewhere between both of them. So I very much like, the diplomacy, this defensive, the need to protect others, the need to care, the need to make sure everybody, like Alex is very much her approach to things. Like, and to me, Alex and my mom are the, this is the person I wish I was more like.
Right.
And Yuli is the person who I'm like, oh, that is badass, but I shouldn't be that, and no one should, because that's also toxic to the self. And I'm somewhere in the middle, right? I am somewhere in between those two things. So there was a lot that came from my family, and this is just like on the surface level, but when it comes down to the main characters, some names that I'm going to be using, like it's very much tied.
That's fantastic. That's great. We have one more question from Sherry out here, and I think it's interesting. You said you grew up reading superheroes. What did you think about Gal Gadot being Wonder Woman? I mean, like, what was that as an Israeli?
I was an adult when that happened.
Sure.
But I can say this is a weird anecdote. Because it's a conversation that even happens in my household, like with my wife. My wife is American, right?
Sure.
And Chinese American. So she was telling me at some point, and it'll all make sense in a second, but she was telling me at some point she had a discussion with a friend about when he was wondering, hey, why is it, and this was many years ago, right? But he was like, why do Chinese people get so excited when they see like, oh, a Chinese actor like on screen? We all nowadays, I think, are educated enough to know why. But this was a discussion that she had. So it's less about obviously Jewish people, but more about Israelis because it is such a small community. And in many ways in Israel, anybody who lives in Los Angeles like me and, made it into Hollywood, into the industry, whatever, like there's a very aspirational thing about it because it is a journey and it's not easy to kind of do this.
Absolutely.
So I think that aspect, no matter what, like I intellectualize, I basically try to like rationalize everything in my head. So I'm just like, oh, good for her. Cool. But there is a part of it that you go like, yeah, good job. You made it.
That's fair. You can take that. Take that as a W.
Right? There is part of you. It's always going to be there. You don't use it. You don't swing it. But it's there. Like, you're like, yeah. One of us made it. I don't, again, intellectually, I don't like it because I'm like, but that's not your achievement. There is no us. That's her.
that's fair. But it's in some way it's similar to, and I can't relate to this, directly, but I understand it. When Kamala Harris became vice president, women can say, yeah, good for her. It had nothing to do with them. They're not vice president. They're not, that person. But like, there's that, hey, that's something that I can relate to her, some part of her experience. And, she achieved something, So, I mean, like that, I think it's cool. That's good. You should take it.
I hope that answers the question more.
It's good. I think it's fair. So, this is on is it like a month? Is it full 4-weekly schedule on Eden Frost coming out? And it's how many issues are in the first arc?
In the first arc, there are 4 issues. The first one is already out in stores. The second one is coming out because, December is December. So the second one is coming out January 17th. And then it's every month. There's going to be another one in February and another one.
December is a mess. So we all understand.
Yes, exactly. So it's going to be like January, February, March. And then in May, hi, David. How are you doing, man? David Hazen from Nottingham is in the chat.
Yep. Welcome, hi, David. Appreciate it.
So essentially, like all the way up to March, and then in May, it's coming out as a trade paperback.
Right.
So all 4 issues.
Are you working on Arc 2? Are we there yet?
I'm going to be quiet.
Okay, good. That's fine. We'll take that.
I'm going to be quiet. But that's the goal. That's the goal.
Absolutely. I want to. So I don't have it written down, but can you give your website address out there so we can make sure?
Yeah, absolutely. It's www. It's my name, AmitTishler.com. So great. Amit Tishler, TISHLER.com.
And we have your tags in the underlining, so you can grab them there. I really, really appreciate you doing this. I've had a wonderful time.
Same here, man.
Thank you so much. We'll meet up again. Are you going to be at any conventions coming up soon at all?
I don't know yet.
You don't have anything else?
Well, I can tell you this for sure. I'm definitely going to be in San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con next year.
Great.
Because I have 3 more original titles coming up, and hopefully I can talk more about, at that point, Eden Frost continuation as well.
Sure.
Go out to stores and buy it.
The humanoids people talk to me too, so we'll see what's going on with that too.
Yeah,
so,
you'll know.
But yeah, absolutely, it was great having you. I appreciate this. Best of luck.
Thanks so
And,
much, man.
this is going to be available for people to watch if they're coming in late. If they want to go back to the beginning, please do. We had some great conversations about, identity and where it comes from in Eden Frost and what people are dealing with today. So thank you so much for this. It was really wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for anybody who's listening. And go out there and get Eden Frost, because it's going to be one hell of a journey. That's it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, we're going to cut it a little early tonight. Thank you for joining us. Again, it is Giving Tuesday. It's towards the end of the day. Think about people who you can afford to help out. Find a charity that you like. There's a couple in the chat that we, definitely support. We will be back here next week. I will make sure Mike has the best microphone possible, so he's ready to go. Next week, we are going to have comic book artist and writer Ron Randall on the show. He's in the middle of a Kickstarter for the latest issue of Trekker, or volume of Trekker. He has made an institution of Trekker on Kickstarter. So he's going to be on it with us next week on Tuesday, same time. We will be here. I will make sure Mike is here. I will go up to Connecticut and get him on. We'll be there. Thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you next week. We appreciate you being here.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?